Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for Building the Dream Studio. We decided to call this session that because every organization reaches a point where they wish they had a blank canvas. Whether you already have a studio now or you want to advance the one you already have, you want a studio that really advances the mission of your organization. So today, we'll explore how to connect creative ambition with business value and what it takes to turn a vision into a fully realized high-impact studio. We will touch on defining success and building the business case, quantifying ROI and validating the investment, designing for flexibility and future readiness, and probably a couple other things too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. All right, so we are joined today by three incredible voices that I'm so happy to be speaking with you with. First, we have Ivan Nelson, who led global video and studio operations at Prudential Financial. He brought corporate communication strategy and measurable ROI to life there. We also have Bill Byer. He is a media consultant with decades of experience in broadcast operations, formerly with Fox. And we're so happy to have him with us today as well.
Glad to be
He's
here.
been recently helping networks and organizations transition from traditional broadcast into digital-first models. And then right here we have Peter Prevost. He's president and director of design at Prevost Studio and has spent more than 2 decades translating brand identity into high-performing studios and content environments. So we want to start the conversation today off with vision, then move into ROI and design, and then close with a look at the studio of the future. Does that sound good?
Let's do it.
Okay, great. At the end, everyone will be able to submit questions for a Q&A at the end. So start teeing it up, everyone. So let's start at the beginning. When an organization or a team feels like they need to update their studio or build a new one from scratch, where should they begin? Ivan, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Lauren. And first, I should start by acknowledging that none of us are people who are comfortable in front of cameras. We're usually behind the cameras. So I apologize to the hundreds of people who are watching us right now.
Thousands.
Thousands, sorry. Thousands.
Millions.
Well, oh, yeah, all right.
Okay,
You're stretching
all right,
it a little bit. But our apologies. We're going to try to make this as painless as possible. But to answer your question, I would say that it's really important for you as a media manager to look for ways to tie your studio to your company and your organizational objectives, right? If you're watching this and you're considering upgrading your studio or building a new studio, obviously you've thought of all the problems the studio is going to help you solve. But have you thought of all the problems you could solve for your entire organization? So look for the use cases you haven't thought of yet. That's really a key success factor for designing the right studio, not for just the organization that you support currently, but the organization you could be supporting over the long haul.
Absolutely, so making sure you understand those long-term objectives.
Well, I mean, you bring up a good point where, I mean, a lot of the organizations that we work with, there are so many different kind of verticals within that large organization. And so what we find is that we end up building a studio for one particular entity within that organization. Once it's built, then, you know, out comes everyone else about, you know, the build it and they will come kind of thing, right? So yeah, I mean, I think you're right. We really have the opportunity, those individuals that are deciding to make the jump to a new studio, it's all about getting the rest of the organization on board to really make it really worth it.
That's a great point. I mean, you really need all the stakeholders involved. You need the
Yeah.
content managers,
Yeah.
you know, the purse strings, the
Yeah.
upper management. Everybody really needs to come together and figure out what is the purpose, right? What's the purpose? What are we trying to solve? And it's our job at that point to go in and go, okay, this is how we're going to do this, right? And so, you know, getting everybody together and getting that purpose and what content's going to be in here? How are you using this space? You know, all those questions need to get answered before you even start.
Yeah, agreed.
Absolutely. So what would you say is the right balance between creative vision and the business case?
Whoa,
Who wants to go
that's
with
a
that
hard one.
Yeah.
Well, that's again, I think we're going back to the same thing, right? What is the vision? What is the space being used for? Okay, what is the budget?
Yeah.
right? You got to work within the budget. And what are the most important things that you need in this studio? Is it flexibility? Is it future growth? I think you need to look at all those cases as you're thinking about what we're putting in this space, this use. And that all comes back again to how are you using this space, right? Is it going to be, locally, internally? Is it going to be across countries? There's a lot to be thought about before you get started. And again, in that budget, how do we solve those problems?
Well, it's interesting because, the question is about like vision and then business strategy. And oftentimes, and maybe it's not just us, but whenever we talk to a client about designing a studio, it's not how do we create a studio just to do one thing, but how do we create a studio to do multiple things? And even if that, again, we were talking about different groups within large organizations, even within that group that we're helping, they kind of know what they need, but they don't necessarily know all of the use cases, right? Let alone like the use cases of the whole organization. So oftentimes, like for us, it's like, how do we design this thing that kind of does what it's supposed to, but then also anticipates other users that we haven't even met yet.
Right.
So
yeah, and that's where flexibility comes in. Going back to what you were saying about build it and they will come, the reality is once your organization or stakeholders in your organization find out that you have a new space, that you have a new studio, they will come and ask you if you could do something you haven't thought of.
Yeah.
Right? So that's why it's really important for you to scan the entire organization and to think about all the possibilities, because it will happen. It happened to me when I built a studio in pharma in 2008. We were able to move from an old headquarters to a new headquarters, and luckily, because we were in the basement, we had a much bigger footprint that could accommodate live webcast and broadcast. And within 2 months, the sales and marketing organization came to us and said, "Hey, Ivan, can we perhaps do a live national sales meeting in your studio instead of flying all these people across the country?" Yeah. And we did. And it's because we had built the flexibility into the studio. We didn't think, we're only going to support this 1 or 2 use cases. We built for growth, and that's really the key, because if you don't build it for growth, you will end up a year or 2 down the road regretting it, and you won't get more money to update your facility and to go back and fix it.
Very important to try to get it right the first time.
Exactly.
So what would you say in your experience helps leadership visualize the why before there's ever a drawing, like so that they really understand the level of investment they need to make? Do you have any tips from your experience on helping leadership understand the why?
Because that's often one of our biggest challenges.
Yeah.
Is not leadership, but like working with the groups that are fully invested in doing the studio and supporting it, and they know how it's going to help get, move the strategy forward. But oftentimes it's like, how do they convince the leadership to do it, right? Relative to the why.
Well, there are no shortcuts, and there are no solutions that fit
no magic pill,
no magic bullet, no blue or red pill. It's really because every company is different, has a different culture. Many factors and variables really impact the decision, like the financial strength of the organization, the long-term and short-term goals. Your position in the organization, are you sufficiently high in the organization to pitch it to the CFO or to the CEO? What are your relationships with stakeholders? Are you, what's the reputation of your team? What's the reputation of your manager? What's your reputation? How competitive is the organization? All these factors in to how you build a business case that's going to succeed and going to convince the decision makers.
Absolutely. And if I could jump in on that one, I would say it's all about always knowing your audience. Like, try to think about what their learning style. Do you think this leader likes to see everything written out, or do they like to see a drawing or talk it through verbally and there's no way they're going to read this memo? Just always know your audience and tailor the why to who it is you're talking to, whether it's the CFO, CMO, and so on.
I go back to solving the problem, right? And if somebody comes to you with a studio idea, they've got something on their mind. They've got a strategic goal that they want to hit, right?
Yeah.
Does that strategic goal of theirs line up with the corporate's goals?
Yeah.
Right. And if they do, and they can make a case that this studio and what I'm going to do with this studio is going to move those strategic goals forward, which is going to move other things forward, I think that, the case can be made to build the studio, right? But if you go in with hey, I want to build a studio, and we're going to make content, and you're talking in overall vague terms, I don't think that works.
I mean, it's always better when it's top down, right? We could all agree on that.
Yeah.
I mean, when there's minimal selling to
exactly,
do, but
right.
Fortunately or unfortunately, that's not.
Yeah, and that happens.
case.
That happens sometimes, and I think what you have to do is obviously have the conversations with all the key stakeholders in the organization and try to find and build bridges with perhaps teams you haven't worked with yet. But another thing that's really important to do is to look at how, and I lost my train of thought. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
I'll go back to it later. Oh, no, I'll go back later. Sorry.
Top down. We're talking about top down, convincing people from top.
Well,
from
if I can move us along a little bit. So, assuming that we get everyone on board, we're starting the project. Where have you seen vision go off track, and do you have any advice on getting it back on course? Have you ever seen it where you thought everyone was on the same page?
I like to take that one.
Okay, go for it.
Well, so I think what's interesting, the reason why I asked both of you guys here, so when we're talking about content creation, developing studios that are flexible, in a way, like it's coming from commercial broadcast for what,
35
100 years,
35,
something like that. Did they have
years.
cameras back then? All right. So commercial
We drew
broadcast.
most of it.
It's like the cave paintings of Lascaux,
Exactly
right?
right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So commercial broadcast and then corporate communications. The players and the strategy is different from those respective, to a certain extent, those respective viewpoints. But there's something to be said about. We were just talking earlier or yesterday about digital and what does digital mean. But I think, Bill, you really, with your organization, really built a studio that embedded flexibility into it, right? And like physically, how you guys use the studio. I mean, it's really, for me, kind of a prototype of, again, whether it's commercial broadcast or whether it's corporate, like to be able to use the studio, reconfigure it in a flexible way, use technology, LED to transform the space. That's kind of best case scenario.
Exactly. And I'll just go back to Lauren's question real quick about how
Yeah.
things can get off track, right?
Yeah.
So, you have a budget, obviously, to work in. We built a brand new studio in DC. And we wanted it to be as flexible as possible. So there's certain things I needed in that studio to make that happen, and not just in the space, but in the technology as well. And so when you get into the budgeting and you start looking at, what you really want, you have to sell that. I mean, it's just like in a corporate, situation. I'm selling that to my GM, who may want another conference room that's going to take up. Take up $100,000 of my money that I want over here in the studio.
From the overall budget.
And at some point, you bang your head against the wall, and you take the wins where you can get them, right? And so that I'll go back to what's the most important, because it can go off the rails, right? It can go off the rails that you don't get what's most important if you're not really thinking in that whole, looking at the big picture, right? For us, I knew about look, I built studios in every nook and cranny of a building because the main studio, and I need it because content managers are going, well, we want, like you said before, right? Well, we want to do this. Can we do this? Sure. Our first answer as guys behind the cameras is always yes, right? Yeah. So we're building these little studios. So when we built our studio together, Pete, I wanted the ability to change space like that, right? And so we love the warmth of a physical studio. And we built in the LEDs into that physical studio to story, right? So when we went to change the space, we could snap our fingers with the right graphics and the right depth into that, where you wouldn't know you were in the same space once you change the graphic look of the thing. And as content creators, the stakeholders change a lot. Right, and so and you guys come in with new ideas, and how do we do that? Well, okay, let's put our thinking hats on. Well, we can do it in this space, so we can move the monitor that's on the tracks the other way, and we have the foresight to put those monitors on tracks, right, and then use the wall in a certain different way. So there's a lot of flexibility in that studio where you give me a show idea and we'll make it happen, right, and I think. Future-proofing, when you think about all that, how do you do that? I think we did a really good job of taking that studio into the next 6-7 years, right, before we have to.
6-7.
Well, 6-7. Doing this?
All right, sorry.
That's what I meant earlier. That's why we apologize. Sorry.
So we're also a comedic act as well as a webinar.
Right.
So,
no, but I just want to follow Bill, because you made a really important comment about what could go off rail, and budget discussions often go off rail and often end up in a place that's uncomfortable. And you think you have, I don't know, $1.5 million, and then you realize no, you only have $1 million, and you have to make a decision. How do you build it in a way that will function and still future-proof you, right? And
how do you approach that?
And so. The way I approach it is, first of all, I focus on making sure I have the biggest footprint I can get. That's because you're not moving every 2 or 3 years. You're usually staying in the same place for 10, 20, 30 years sometimes, right? So get the biggest footprint. Don't buy the cameras first. Install a router that's big enough for the next 5 years. Don't buy a 16 by 16. Buy a 64 by 64.
Yes.
Don't buy a switcher with 1 ME. Buy more MEs than you think you'll need in the next 2 years, because you will need them later on.
Invest in infrastructure.
Right, and then maybe you buy 1 or 2 cameras and then rent the other ones when you need more than those 2 cameras. But be smart and build the infrastructure, focus on the infrastructure first, and then you could start adding stuff at the end of every year when budget shows up at your doorstep.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Absolutely.
So I have a question for you, and it's how should the audience be thinking about those big budget buckets, like in proportion to one another? If someone's trying to come up with kind of a ballparky number, what's the ratio of the budget you would want for?
Did you just think of that one?
Yeah.
That's good.
Okay. We're improv artists also.
So here's what happens. Hey Peter, we need a studio. This sounds great. Do you have a base building budget? Well, what's that? Or so do you have so everybody, not everybody, it's very common that when someone has this idea about a studio, they're really only thinking about the scenery or the things that you see, technology. It's usually technology and scenery. But what there also is behind the scenes is the HVAC duct that is like running through the middle of the space that's like really loud, or it could be acoustics. It could be, there's an elevator bank that is really loud. And some of those things or cafeteria, some of those things you really can't do much about, but oftentimes there's like 4 buckets, right? So there's like the base building infrastructure bucket, which is kind of takes care of as much or as little of all of the box, right? The black box that you can. And then you've got lighting. Oftentimes we'll kind of underestimate, when I say we, the project team, they'll underestimate the budget for lighting. And even though, I'm an architect, designer, scenic guy, like, you kind of need, like, I would say at some points, like lighting is just as important as scenery and the stuff that you put in front of it. Because you can make a really great set look bad with bad lighting, and you can make a mediocre set look really great with great lighting. So you've got base building infrastructure, you've got lighting, you've got scenery, obviously, and then you've got on-set AV and technology. And oftentimes that could be, if it's presenting content, that could be a touch screen, or it could be kind of a LED wall like this. And then I would say what's also happening, the fifth bucket is, which we're also starting to do, is like the content bucket, right? So you spend $1 kajillion or half a kajillion or $250 million on something like this, and then, not that nobody knows, but because of the scale of it, generally speaking, clients aren't used to creating content for it, right? And it's not rocket science, but oftentimes, so like when, I'll tell you, it's non sequitur. So when Rayford came down to shoot the Atlanta United thing for us, right, last week or the week before, he came down and basically also went out and shot this with you, right?
Yeah.
But what's interesting about that is that it's not just a photograph, right? But it's content that has depth to it, that when you see it on camera and it's in an LED wall, it kind of creates a place, a space. And I wish that, I mean, that's one of the reasons why we're like offering the content stuff, is that it makes or breaks the space, really. And so, yeah, so those are the 5 buckets, 4.5 buckets.
Amazing, amazing. Did anyone have any thoughts about that before I?
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, that what you hit on is really important, because people don't take into consideration the black box and what that costs, because really what you're trying to do is get as much money for AV and
everything else
and
in front of
everything
camera.
else, you know, that's going to be on camera that you can. And so when you're looking at budgeting, most times things get under budgeted, right? And oftentimes the AV does suffer, because you have to have the black box and you have to have the AC, and you know, running through the right through the whole thing.
You know, it's very interesting, this conversation, because it highlights the fact that within organizations, there really is a lack of understanding of what it takes to build a well-designed studio. And it really is the job of the media manager to do their homework and really understand how the cost is broken down, so that they can in turn explain it to management. Why is it costing so much? Well, you got to rewire the electricity. You've got
You don't have enough power. You don't have enough data.
You need a different type of AC. And you need a different type of wireless, and the list goes on. And what you think would have cost $500,000 really should cost $2 million.
Yes.
So it's really a matter of education and educating the key decision makers inside the organization to understand why it's expensive.
Yeah, and I think that goes into the planning part, where you're starting this whole conversation again, right? So that, you know, people really understand, educate them in the beginning, so that you're not trying to convince them during the project, right? Because that is what really, I think, sinks a project more than anything is. That's over budget, and you didn't think about this piece. You know, all that really needs to be thought of on the front end, and it's always better for the project in the end, right? That you know.
So there's one scenario we haven't discussed yet, and it kind of ties into what I wanted to say earlier, which is there are inflection points in companies' histories where you have this golden opportunity to get the studio that you want. And very often these inflection points are a management change. New management comes in and their expectations for audiovisual communication is much higher than the previous management. And so you don't get a blank check, but you get a check, which is good. And then there's another inflection point, like what happened in New York in the past few weeks with the opening of the new JP Morgan Tower, built from the bottom up. They could build an entirely new infrastructure, new studios, new boardrooms, et cetera, et cetera. So you don't even need a budget. It's basically baked into the big budget. And then there's another scenario where your company is moving to a different headquarters. A lot of companies move every 10, 20 years. So that's an opportunity to really grab on, to secure a bigger space and to upgrade your services.
Yeah, I agree with all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of our inflection points was, you know, we were 60 years in a building, right? And we were able to figure out that, okay, we're going to make that move, right? Instead of staying in the same building. And once that hit, we had not a blank check, but we had a pretty good check to go in and build the studio of the future. You know, completely IP, completely 2110. and beautiful studios, and you know, it was a great project. But when it never happened, without that inflection point hitting, with that, okay, lease is up, we don't want to put any more money into this.
Yeah.
We're out of here,
But
right?
Bill, did you feel, sorry, something just came to me. So did you feel with that existing studio, like you guys were successful, you guys were cranking out content. Did you feel though at some point that the existing facility was kind of holding you guys back for the kind of productions that you want to do?
Absolutely.
Not just quality, but like quantity and...
Yeah,
you know.
like I said before, I mean, we were building little crappy studios.
Yeah. No, good studios.
Crappy studios.
They were great.
No, they were crappy, and you know, and they were in little spaces, and we were, you know,
You're using every inch.
we're using every little
every
inch
space,
of everything and trying to squeak out a little money here. And we never had enough money really to make it look like the way we wanted to look, you know. And then,
But every organization has those
but
challenges.
if you think about it, you know, and you knew our space, right? So our space at the last studio, I won't mention where it was, but in DC was a smaller space, right? The whole space was smaller, and you know, we ended up at over 105 hours of content a week. I couldn't see us doing that content in that studio. Something would have had to have shifted if we were going to go that way. You know, and a lot of broadcasters are looking to go 24/7, right? And there's a lot of content that needs to be created, and you cannot, you know, look, I always say this: you can take a car, and you can, you know, a beautiful car, and you can go, you know what? I'm not going to put new tires on that. I'm not going to, you know, I'm not going to go ahead and change that mirror that's broken. And by the time you're done, you can't sell this car for anything. It's the same with product, right? You cannot bottom line your product and squeeze it and squeeze it and squeeze it till there's nothing really left to sell. Right? So, you know, building that studio and having that flexibility and to be that creative, right? And when you build these flexible studios, creativity comes to the studio. Actually, after a while, the content creators are creating content and they're driving the studio. But sometimes, if you do it right, the studio will drive your creativity. Right? And so when now we're doing 100 hours of local programming, it's good content, local programming that people want to consume, right? So.
It's great because there's really a parallel between broadcast and corporate in that very often a lot of teams start very small with tiny little studios.
Scrappy.
It's scrappy. And then they, over the years, have the ability to iterate and change stuff. But the opportunity to build, for example, a SMT 2110 facility is difficult to come by because you have to rip everything out and build something completely new. So you need those inflection points to do that, and that's why the adoption of SMT 2110 has been slowed both in broadcast and in corporate.
Yeah, it has been, and there's a lot to that, right? And we don't have to go through that here, but
That's
there's
the
also,
next one.
that's the next one.
Right.
So-
Next one, SMT 2110.
So there was a question that we've talked about offline before that I wanted to make sure we bring up. You know, you mentioned inflection points. Do you wait to start preparing your business case until you hear about the inflection point? Or when do you start preparing? And
that's the setup.
how do you communicate ROI? What kinds of things matter to stakeholders?
Well, that's two questions there.
Question.
One at a time. Okay.
I cheated.
Yeah, you should always have a plan in somewhere to upgrade your facility because it's true, you don't anticipate the inflection points and especially the management ones happen really fast. One day you have a CEO and then the next you have a new CEO and the whole executive suite is changing in the next 2 months and they start asking questions. So you should always be thinking, and I know most media managers are thinking about what the next step is going to be, but start also developing the relationships inside the organization to make sure that you have support from a lot of key people when you dust off the plan and present it to your management.
I think that's really important. You have to have the clout at some point and the relationships if you're going to sell something to your CEO or your GM or your news director or whoever it is that's above you. You really they need to trust you, right? That trust needs to be there. They're spending a lot of money. Right. Nobody wants to be the guy who did that.
Yeah, right.
Right?
Yeah.
and to go a step further, if you're in a situation where there's a really big shakeup in the executive suite, they may be looking at you with a different perspective because they come from a company where the maturity, the production maturity was a lot higher than your production maturity. And so if you're not ready with that plan to show that you're aware, but it was a management issue, not a production management issue, you can regain that credibility really quickly. If you don't have a plan, then that chance to regain the credibility with that new management team is gone.
That's really important. And to build your case of, here's where I am, and this is where I'm stuck, right? I could give you this, but we need to make some changes, right? And to have that, that product that you already have in hand and say, you can just say, and I've done this a billion times, look at the show. The show looks, it could be this, but right now we're stuck with this and it's driving me nuts, but if we just did this, we could bring it to the next level. And I've done really well with that over the years of convincing, my superiors, my upper management to follow that.
And Bill, did that involve usually like showing them what could be possible, like benchmarking, showing what others are doing?
It's always a good idea to document it, and when I say document it, I mean visually. Look, we're in a visual business, right? And again, I got to go back to this because it's really important. It's use case. What are you using the space for? How are you moving my strategic goals forward if I'm giving you money to go ahead and take care of the problem you say you have, right? So that's really important, right? And then the other part of that is to show the problem, be able to show it and show how, and you talk about ROI, and that drives me crazy, by the way, because, in my business, you need a studio. You got to have it, right? Your strategic goal is content, right? Content is king.
Right.
In a corporate situation, it's a little different, I think. But I think the avenues of getting what you need, you still have to go through. There's still those silos. There's still those compartmental pieces in an organization that you have to convince and get through. So I think it's really important to be able to show where you're at and where you need to be and how that's going to move your organization forward.
So to answer your question, though, about ROI, before we forget, I think there are two different types of ROI. There's the tangible ROI and the intangible ROI. Intangible ROI, you have the classic, let's produce it more efficiently, increase quantity, increase quality, and also support more use cases for the entire organization, as well as tying your content to revenue generating use cases and applications, right? If you're doing a lot of internal communication and employee communication and some marketing, you really should think about working with marketing on thought leadership initiatives like what we're doing now, and connecting your team with something that's going to generate revenue for your company. And then there's the intangible piece. The intangible piece could be branding, right? Do you want all the content that your company is producing to have one look and feel that really says, oh, this is company X, XYZ, and not have content that's produced and look like it could have been produced by this company, but it could have been produced by that company, and you can't really tell, who's generating the content and why. So really building a studio that can reflect the brand, your brand, and then we could talk later a little bit about how to deal with the brands that have multiple brands.
To your point, broadcasters are great at doing that, right? We're great at branding who we are. But to your point on the corporate side, I've seen it all over the place, where that really needs to come together, and that's a problem we could solve.
I mean, one of the things that we're noticing more in having conversations with Fortune 500s, regardless of what industry, is a lot of them want us to help put together kind of a competitive landscape, like literally what everybody looks like on camera. And when you do that, again, it's not rocket science, right? But when you actually put that brand that's looking at building the facility of the studio next to their peers, sometimes there's a huge gap. It's self-evident, and then others it's not. And even where there's not a lot of difference between their competitor and them, the quality still doesn't match the brand, right? It's still, when you look at the other touch points that the brand has across, whether it's television, whether it's web, whether it's print, whatever media you come up with, oftentimes, I would say 8 out of 10 times, there is a gap in terms of the level of production and the brand. And I mean, that's one of the, I don't want to say it's an easy lift, but that's the easy thing for us to say, look, at the end of the day, you're XYZ, look at how you're presenting yourself across these other mass media communications channels. Let's just help you bring you up to the level that you could be or should be.
Absolutely. And then, Peter, I had a question I want to make sure we get to with you on the design side, which is what defines a studio that's built to evolve?
That's an easy one.
Curveball.
Okay, so some of it is planning, right? So for us, for our studios, and I talked to Bill a lot about this when we did his studio. So ideally we give you a toolbox, because the way I see it, yes, we are creators of immersive visual experiences for your brand, right? Yes. But at the end of the day, we kind of give you guys ideally a toolbox, right? And we work with you, figure out what the tools need to do, maybe 2, 3, 4 different scenarios, right? But the best compliment is we leave the toolbox like right here, and then kind of like what we did for you guys. And then you guys use the tools in different ways to create other content, right? So for us, the future, what did you say, future thing? What was the
A
word?
studio built to evolve.
Okay, so the whole idea of evolution,
flexibility.
the whole idea of
I
evolution.
didn't know we were going to get into evolution.
No, I know. Again, that's the other one. That's the next one.
Wrong
SMPTE 2110 and evolution.
That's the political show use case.
Yeah. So ideally, it's the fact that we give everybody a toolkit that they can reconfigure and reuse, right? Because a lot of our scenery, things move, they track, you can reconfigure, even the same corner, you've got LED, you've got tracking monitors, you've got all of these things that are moving, and it's really up to, I mean, the studio of the future, which I guess we'll talk about at some point, it is really about giving the clients and their creative people the tools that they can be creative to make the content that they haven't even thought of yet, right? And I would say, in addition to that, part 2 of the toolbox is that the toolbox is going away and becoming a virtual toolbox, right? So yes, you have a physical toolbox, but then as we start to continually integrate, technology like this, it's really about both the physical and the virtual. So if I were to say anything, accommodating those use cases, that flexibility, it's all about having a studio that does multiple things, and then also integrating technology that by swapping out the content in the technology, you kind of create flexibility and stuff.
And I would like to add, because it's something that I experienced working with Peter when we built our studio at Prudential.
Should I give you $20 before this?
Yeah. But we'll talk about it later.
Okay,
but it's what I was really surprised when the studio was delivered is how powerful of an instrument lighting is. I mean, I knew lighting was important, right? But the LED lighting, the LED panels, the accents here and there that were completely customizable in color and intensity allowed us to not only do some shows that felt like a talk show, but then do really intimate interviews that looked like they were produced in a completely different place.
Yeah.
And so flexibility can be built into a set, even if the set is permanent, thanks to LED technology, thanks to LED lighting and the accents. And I, we were really discovered a lot of things along the way as we really try to find innovative ways of using the different areas of the studio.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. I mean, even though for your studio, there was both, we had LED, and I don't want anybody to think just because, if you don't have the budget or you've got limited budget for LED, we had areas in your studio where there was LED wall, but then we had big graphic drops. So we had like literally kind of 3 roller drop that allowed you guys to like change and swap out the background. So it can be very like low tech in terms of creating that flexibility. It doesn't have to be
as well as a sliding wall.
yeah, the sliding wall thing. And,
What I also really liked was the fact that you designed a lot of curves into the set, even though a studio is a box, right? Curves are much more human than straight lines, and so the curves are
they're
really
they're the sweet spots of the studio.
right. And so they were movable pieces, but also the curvatures of the set pieces also, I think, added some humanity, and I think that was a great accent created in the design. But yeah, it's that's the beauty of it, though. When you have a lot of space, and although we didn't have a huge amount of space, but when you have a lot of space and you design it with flexibility in mind, then the creatives that are using the studio will come up with new ways that nobody's ever thought about.
Yeah,
exactly.
Well, you found that too.
Yeah, well, I was saying before that the studio drives creativity after a while, right? So as you go into this project of creating a flexible studio for the content that, and again, I can't say it enough, talking to the content creators, the content managers, is so important when you're building that space out, because now you know what you're going to need to get that done, right? And then after a while, that studio will create content,
Absolutely. Now I want to get to a really fun question for all of us.
Fun questions.
We're getting to,
Oh, that wasn't fun?
Yeah, that was fun. No,
That's
but
a blast.
So,
Let's talk about your childhood.
that's not fun. But I like to think of myself as a futurist. And I would love to hear from each of you, what does the studio of the future mean to you?
Well, to me, there's a lot that goes into that, right? And I think that organizations need the flexibility to be able to have a one-man band studio where they can go and create content in, and one person's driving that, And I'm not talking about the content piece. I'm talking about the AV, the AV piece, right? Operations, operating a studio, being able to spin it up quickly and have one person driving that for content, and that content can go anywhere over platforms, whatever platforms, right? But then you need to be able to spin up resources, right? So to your point of building the biggest space you can possibly build, I'm completely on board. But we use that space for, maybe it's XR, maybe it's just a bigger LED wall, maybe it's just a bigger physical space. But you need to be able to spin up resources at a moment's notice to be able to do full productions, right? And I'm not just talking about human resources. I'm really talking about the technical resources needed to do a full-on production. So I think this studio of the future needs to be, for all organizations, needs to be flexible enough to accommodate content that is relevant and can be done by one person, or bigger content for bigger shows and bigger launches and town halls or whatever broadcasts to be able to spin up those resources to be able to do that. And then, when you look across organizations that are, somebody's in China, somebody's in New York, somebody's in, New Jersey somewhere. Jersey.
Jersey.
Can we also incorporate cloud, right? And cloud computing? And I know cloud computing is expensive, but you can spin that up as well when you need it, AWS, and be able to control rooms, studios from a central control room remotely.
That's definitely a trend.
All of that needs to be part of, I think, a vision of the studio of the future. Yeah.
You made a lot of really interesting points, but I just want to echo one, which is when I think multi-purpose, flexible studio, I typically think complexity, right? Because in order to build something that's really flexible, it becomes really complex really fast, right? So how do you build a studio that's extremely flexible and complex, but at the same time supports the unique or single use cases that you're mentioning with just one operator?
So is that a question to me?
Yes.
Okay, so we've done it, right?
Right.
So we've done it. So I have a smaller area in that bigger studio where you can have, and you use, and I don't want to get too technical, but you're using companion buttons to just control just about everything. So it's a one button push. I can push one button, have all the graphics come up behind me, have music play, have camera one come up, and mic one come up all at the same time with one push of a button, right?
So
using like a V-Mix, so you can use, there's so many people that have got these box studios out there, right, that you integrate with TriCasters or ATEMs.
Which used to be a bad word, but
it's still a bad word to me. Sorry.
Oops. There goes the sponsorship.
Oops! Oh my God. I like separate components that work together, because if one component goes down, I can rely on something else as a backup. That's my only. That's my only.
What's interesting to me, Bill, is that like what you have been doing in commercial broadcast is really and the one button and all that is really where I see the corporate is the biggest need of that, one of the biggest needs, right? And I know that commercial broadcast, there's everything's going to robotics and everything else, but
as long as the requirements are really defined well and everybody agrees on them, because what often happens is you come up with this idea and you have this one application and it doesn't happen often enough to really justify the investment, or if it happens often enough, because I know we considered it, if it happens often enough, the issue is that automation really ties your hands behind your back, and so that one button comes at the cost of really being able to alter the format. So in local news, when the 5 p.m. show is basically done the same way every single day, 7 days a week, it's simpler, but very often you get these single use cases that evolve over time, and somebody says, hey, could we do this? And can we do that?
So I want to answer that. I want to answer that because that's important, right? This is not a single use case. Right. That's why I talk about spinning up resources. Right. So in that same
Tell us what that means.
So in that same pod, right, I can spin up resources. I can bring in Chiron, right, for more complex graphics. Right. I can use the broadcast camera that's over on the side there and do stand-ups and do whatever you want to do in that space. Or I can control a whole control room in a big studio from that area with just spinning up the resources that I need. So not only it's not a single use case, it is a use case for when you need that particular
thing.
One-man band. This is all we need to do to communicate this out.
It's got to be pre-programmed. And so every time you have a new program with a different run of show, then you got to reprogram.
But you don't.
Okay.
You don't, because I have a box in front of me where I can program 6 different shows.
Okay. Right.
In that box. So whatever you want to do, if you want 2 people on set and 2 mics to come up, I've got a button for that. I got a button for this.
But as an example, like for a use case, let's say there's a quarterly C-suite address or a CEO address quarterly. You're going to be doing it every quarter. I think at least it helps me to think more specifically about things. But if you're going to have that, I think what I see in terms of the power of automation is, you may have a director or somebody else that wants to tweak things, but technology is getting to a point where you can have all of that preset and make life a lot easier relative to running the studio, right? But I think to your point, are you saying, okay, well, it's more complex than that relative to the use case? You're saying, hey, if we know that we want to block a shot here, you're saying, well, yes, you may want to do the C-suite address, but at the end of the day, they're going to want to do it not in studio.
No. Okay. What I'm saying is there's always that one request that falls outside of what's programmed in the automation system, and it becomes a problem.
Is that 50% of the time?
Oh, I can't.
What do you think?
But what do you do when it falls outside that use case?
Well, I mean, first of all, just to be clear, we contemplated doing it, but we spoke to a lot of engineers in the city, in New York City, who advised against it because of what I just explained, that when last minute requirements come up, or a problem comes up during a live broadcast, they feel like their hands are tied behind their backs.
Yeah,
so it might be because of the way they designed it, the way it was incorporated
That's
into the
correct. That's-
existing
yeah,
infrastructure.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
There's ways around all of that. I mean, you can build it so flexible now, and the technology is so good that you can do, that single use case that we talk about, but don't think of it as a single use case anymore. Think of it as another tool so that you're not using human resources when you don't need human resources. But when you do need them and you need to do something different, you can still spin up.
Yeah.
And I always use the word spin up, but I'm just saying you're accessing other resources that are already there, right? Because we built it flexible enough that those resources are there. And now you're just bringing in the audio guy, the Chiron guy, the robotics guy, and we're all now in a full-on production, right?
Yeah.
So automation is great, and automation can work. Like there's a ton of them out there that'll just do whatever you want it to do by touching a button, right? But that's not the answer to every problem.
No.
Right.
This is such an important discussion when it comes to thinking about the studio of the future. Peter, I wanted to see if you had any thoughts on that before we pivot to our audience for any Q&A.
Oh yeah, how much time do we have for that?
9 minutes.
Ooh.
Okay, all right.
Well, no, I mean,
But
we
we're
should
gonna
go to
give
the
them
Q&A
5
like
minutes
now. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But
Well, I was
Sorry.
interested just to talk to these guys about XR and immersive technology, and I feel like the technology is getting a lot better to automate it, but what I find is that the content creation piece of it, meaning, okay, whether it's green screen and everything's virtual, or an LED volume, the thing that we're seeing is, and it's gotten much better in past 3 to 5 years, is, okay, how do I maintain all of the equipment and all of the stuff? And then how do I create content? How do I create content? That's first. And then how do I create content maybe on the fly if I want to change things? And until I think technology, AI, whatever workflows we're talking about, make that much more resistant free, I think we're still going to have a rate of adoption that is kind of less than I feel like what the need is, to be honest. So, I mean, how have you guys seen, or what are your thoughts on using XR as either the main means of creating content, or as a hybrid opportunity between physical and virtual?
For corporate communications, I think XR is probably a few years out,
Yeah,
especially in the more serious industries that require certain polish, but also seriousness. But I could see in some industries that launch a lot of products how XR is really could be an important part of their arsenal.
Yeah.
Product launches, I think, are ripe for that.
But when you say product, it doesn't necessarily mean a product.
No,
it means a service. It means
any type of
any
product.
particular,
Any type of event that requires to communicate with a large group of people with a level of quality that is a few notches above what you usually create to mark the occasion.
I don't think we have the time to really to jump in, but I'll say one last thing. I love the XR environments. I've implemented XR in green, right? I see CBS as there's a lot of networks taking on the green space right now and building just green space for studios. So it's there. It is complex. There's a lot that goes into it. It's not for the faint of heart at this point, but I think it's totally doable. I think it's totally doable, especially in the broadcast area. I think that, for us, building sets and using them for, here's the thing, what are you using it for? Again, use case, right? For us, it's elections. For us, it's the Super Bowl. Us, it's, instead of every day being in there and doing weather or doing, having an extension of your physical set in the virtual world, which I think is invaluable. Right, because you've got you can actually take your physical set and make a new piece of it with the same elements, right? In VR, so that you've extended now, your physical set into another space.
And as long as you
I
have
think
the
it's
right
amazing.
artists.
I think it's endless possibilities, and I think you're right. I think it's going to get better and better and better with as technology advances. And I'm talking about a year, 2 years.
Yeah.
You've touched on like two really important themes. The first one is I think it's also going to be predicated upon the industry that you work in. If you're in technology, you probably are going to adopt XR much faster than if you're in pharma or finance.
Yep.
And then the other really important point, which I just forgot again, I'll come back to later.
It's lunchtime.
Yeah, where's lunch?
So do we have
questions?
Yeah, do we have
Do we
questions?
actually have questions? Anyone?
Anybody?
Questions?
Okay. Oh, so I got to think about the second one.
That's good.
Oh,
There's
there's
always more
one.
we could talk about.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, wonderful. Okay, so how do you convince senior leadership to see the studio as a strategic asset and not a cost center?
Oh, that's a good question.
Is that a question
Is that a
from
question?
a viewer?
Is that a question? Brian? Yes, that's a question.
That's a question.
That's a
Right.
question. That's a hard one. Okay, how do you convince leadership to see a studio
wait,
as a
so-
strategic asset, not a cost
I think that's a
center?
good Ivan question.
Yeah, I mean, there is. I think we addressed it a little earlier in the conversation. There isn't one simple way to do it. It really depends on the company culture, who the leadership are, what their expectations are, the financial situation, your relationship with managers and stakeholders around the organization. So there isn't a one way to sell a studio. Unfortunately, it's. I wish it were that simple, where everybody would have a studio.
Yeah, well, sure. That's okay.
Here's a question. What does success look like 6 months after the launch? Are there tangible signs that show the studio is working? From Steve.
That's a great question.
So what does success look like 6 months after launch? Who wants to tackle that?
Well, I think
Go.
success.
Specific again
I think
to the-
success really is going to be obvious much earlier than 6 months. I think people are going to comment about the quality of the work. They should see a measurable bump in the quality of the work and in the impact that your team has on the entire organization.
That's important.
Right.
That's the important part. What's the impact? Again, we're trying to solve a problem. Have we solved that problem 6 months in? Have we ramped up production 6 months in because of what we've done? Have we created better content 6 months in? I think all of that sort of would define the success of the studio once it's built. And how has everybody adapted to that? Right? Has it, you know what I'm saying? Is it really tough to get things done?
Yeah.
Or has it made things better
Easier.
and easier for the organization?
Frictionless.
I think that's
Right.
So this is an interesting one. I don't know if we want to get into it, but something that we've chatted about is sometimes it can be hard for the team as a whole to adapt to the massive changes in your workflows, right? Do you have any thoughts or advice for people who will be going through this in the future? Bringing the team along with you, making sure they're ready for big change?
Why are you answering the question already? No, but this is great because really it's building a studio is really a transformation exercise for the entire team. It's more than just building, putting lights and plugging cameras. It's really a new way of thinking for the entire team. So you need to bring the team on early in the design process so that they not only contribute, but they actually buy and they commit to the process. And they also understand that it's going to require a lot of training after the fact, right? Especially if you've built something that's very different from what you had before. You're going to need to train everybody, and it will take a few months for everybody to find their path. And if you design it really well, and if you built it with flexibility and future-proofing in mind, you're going to continue learning for 6 months, a year, 2, 3 years, because you'll think of new ways and of new things to produce in your studio.
well said.
Absolutely.
Oh, somebody's typing something.
Yes, yes. So
That's okay.
I think we've got two questions. So the next one I wanted to go to, this was one from earlier. How does authenticity play into that vision, especially as technology becomes more advanced?
That's a great question because we live in a world that's increasingly authentic because of social media. There are so many podcasters and so many content creators who are creating content with an iPhone that now this expectation is coming into the organization. And I think it's coming faster in some industries than others. And it will impact the way you design a studio. Your studio is going to look less and less like a broadcast studio and more like an open space, an office that, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's why that's why a lot of our work right now is helping architects and owners, clients basically make the spaces that they're building right now camera ready, right? Because everybody wants to have, not wants to, but expects a level of authenticity from the content you're creating, and how better to do that than from the actual space everybody's working in,
Yeah,
right?
so tell us more about that. So you're talking about non-traditional studio spaces, other spaces.
Yeah, I mean, so there's, again, it's driven by authenticity, but it's also driven by just the fact of the matter is not all content needs to happen within a black box studio, right? And oftentimes there is a new headquarters, and so, well, why don't we design the conference rooms to be a swing space, to be a podcast studio as well? It's not a lot of uptick relative to the level of investment for infrastructure. It's just people aren't doing it, right? Or, hey, we've got this amazing lounge space. It would work really well for like a one-on-one interview or an HR thing or whatever content you could think of. So it's really, again, I think the technology has gotten much better than what it used to be, where for not a lot of money, you can make those spaces camera ready that helps augment the black box studio, right? And
if you want to see how this looks like, look at the OpenAI consumer-facing podcasts. You could look at them on not podcast, but broadcast. You could look at them on YouTube. They basically have an open space that's kind of a kitchen, and they roll in a big LED monitor, and they have lighting stuck to the ceiling. But you could tell it's a space where employees live in every day. That was just converted into a place for the executives to interact with them and to answer questions.
And I think that, like, best case scenario, the level of investment that a company is making, you can amplify that level of investment by, again, making small shifts of incorporating a BSP, or making sure the acoustics are good, or, hiding lighting, theatrical lighting up in the ceiling, kind of pre-engineering all that. So when they do want to do it, it's already there.
I like the flexibility of being anywhere.
Right.
In the organization to be able to shoot, and we accomplished that on our last. You can go into a kitchen and shoot. You can go into the newsroom and shoot. You can go. Everything's a set. My office is a set. At the conference rooms, and I think that plays a lot into authenticity of where you are. But I think a lot of it is content driven as well. What's in back of you. We went out of our way to make sure that people knew that we were, in Bethesda, and what you're looking at behind my anchors is Bethesda, and so yeah.
Absolutely.
That's awesome.
Yep.
So another question that people probably had is...
Are we okay on time?
Yeah, I think we're past
Is anybody
our
going
time.
to cut us off? How's this work? Okay, all right.
Last
Do you want to
question.
read this one?
I have a question for you,
you
though.
have okay.
Yeah, it's when is the ideal time to bring in a partner when you start thinking about building the dream studio? When should you start talking to other people? Who should you start talking to?
Yesterday.
Yeah.
Yesterday. I mean, oftentimes we're brought in at 50% CDs, and the engineers are starting to ask questions about power, data, and all of that. But I mean, my personal opinion is, as soon as there's a need, or even when you're planning that need, right? Find some people, whether it's from a strategic perspective, a business case perspective, or operations perspective, to get that input sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it's back to what we were saying earlier. You want to start sooner than later, before the need is expressed to you.
Yeah.
You want to be seen as being proactively always
Yeah.
looking for opportunities to improve the quality and the impact your team has on the company's bottom line. So you should always be thinking about what's coming next, and you should always be planning for that.
Absolutely. So another question from the audience, from TJ. Oh, did you want to?
Well, I was going to say, let's go to the next one, maybe.
Yeah,
okay,
we want this one? Yeah, so from TJ, we have, how important is building in a one-year support contract with your technology partners for making tweaks to the system based on studio use after day one?
That sounds like one of our consultants wrote that.
Yeah, I think, look, I think, building in a one-year contract, you need to think about building in a 5-year contract at least. A one-year contract is not going to do anything. Look, when you buy from an AV integrator, or you're putting together any kind of studio, you're gonna be paying maintenance fees, and support in general on a lot of your equipment. But you're not going to be, you don't do that short term.
But that's
And
another.
I think the question though
say.
is pointing to the need to actually make changes
Yeah,
after the
tweaks it.
fact,
Yeah.
not a support contract, because
Yeah.
that's not what a support contract
Well,
usually covers.
even that, I would say, you're looking at years out, and
Yeah.
not a one-year
Yeah.
contract, right?
Yeah.
But I think, I mean, for me, when I read that, the point isn't the 1 year as much as it is about, like, there's an understanding that the broadcast team is going to deliver a space, and there's always going to be something that is going to need to be addressed from a technical perspective and a support perspective, right? And so how do you plan, like, for that ongoing maintenance and tweaking of the studio?
Well, look, I think, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but anybody I've ever worked with, if I had an issue with something in my studio, if it was technical, they stood by their product and came in and did what needed to get done, right?
Same.
But if you're looking at a long term where, you didn't anticipate the growth of the studio and you need to, build in something else, that's not part of a contract.
Yeah.
That's, it may be, short-sighted on the front end, which is what we're trying to, we're talking about today, to avoid, right?
Yeah.
So a couple of different things there. We discussed maintenance and support, and then if I have to make changes to this studio, well, it's already designed, it's already in. I think that's going to be on you.
Great.
Yeah.
This has been such a wonderful conversation today. I wanted to give you each the opportunity, if someone only remembers one thing from this conversation today, is there something you would want them to take away? What's your key takeaway?
My key takeaway would be it's always in the beginning, to make sure that you have the right people on board, that you're trying to solve whatever problem you're trying to solve, that you know what that is, it's defined. And everybody's moving in that direction. I think that's really what's important. Content creators, management, your team, right? Your team. Everybody's moving in the same direction to fix that, to address that issue. Yeah.
That's great.
No, well said. I would just echo that and say, dream big. If you're not, I know.
That's a good one.
Dream big, because because you are going to be challenged for that budget, and unless you think big, you're not going to be able to come up with all the applications that your studio is going to support for the long haul. And so start big, and then you'll have to compromise anyway, and you won't get to where you want if you don't really push the envelope a little further.
Point.
I second that, Ivan.
Okay.
That's great.
So we could fade to black.
Yeah. Done. Peter, any thoughts from you?
I think there's kind of two main things. Funny enough, it's really not, about design as much as it is about two things that I always see kind of slip through the cracks in the early planning of the space, which is, and we're doing this for several sports teams right now and a bunch of others, but okay, like, where is the studio located? Is it big enough? Like, and all of the nitty gritty, the unsexy stuff about planning a studio, that always is something that ends up to become a liability that if it's not thought of, at the beginning. And there aren't very many, like, again, I guess this is our podcast, so I'm allowed to say it, but like there aren't a lot of like design professionals that can play in the video production world, as well as the architecture planning world, as well as even like the execution of the studios. So I would say the infrastructure piece, base building, upgrades, and then the other on the opposite end is the content, the stuff that clients put in. Like if I had $1, maybe 50 cents, 10 cents, whatever, for every studio we went live on to try to rehearse and there was no content, or it was like, there's no content. It's a need, right? That we're finding, because more and more, technology is being integrated into the design of studios. That's awesome. But those clients also need help with that. So funny enough, like we're in the middle, what we kind of, do in terms of creating the space and whether it's scenic lighting or whatever, but it's really the opposite ends of all of that, which I see being the biggest like pain points.
I love it.
So
have a clear vision, have your team aligned, dream big, and think through all the small things, right? Think through all the phases of the project.
Let's get to work.
Well, thank you all so much for this conversation today. Thank you to everyone online for joining us. That's a wrap.
Everybody.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Nice. And